Welcome to Aspire to Lead, where we empower educators and school leaders to grow, inspire, and thrive. I'm your host, Joshua Stamper, author, speaker, and leadership coach, bringing you conversations that spark transformation, challenge the status quo in education, and equip you to make a lasting impact on your campus or in your district. For more information and resources, visit joshstamper.com as we're looking to ascend to new leadership heights together. Welcome back, everyone, to Aspire to Lead. My name is Joshua Stamper, and the person on the screen here is my good friend of the podcast. She's been on here a million times, and we actually did a series called Aspire to Rise. I don't know if you remember this, Sarah, as we would do coaching with aspiring leaders. Sarah Johnson, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead once again.
Thank you for having me. And here's the crazy part. When you said that, I was like, oh, we live coached people. And when you said, you don't know if I remember, I think that was the cue that you must have known I didn't for a hot minute, which was so crazy, but that was so awesome. And the fun part is I like to look back at the people we had on that series, and they're doing great things. So
they are.
Obviously not because of us, but it's wonderful to have really wonderful people in our orbit.
Hopefully we had a small piece in that. I mean, clarifying some things for them, but it was a lot of fun on our end. I know that coaching is something that's extremely passionate for both of us. I mean, I do that now with my Aspire to Lead cohort, which is launching December 1st for those who are interested. And then also, Sarah, you're doing it with Jimmy Costas and Associates and doing a beautiful job. As this week, I think you were traveling all over the country working with various administrators.
Yeah. Can we just say first, yay to an Aspire cohort. Yes. That's exciting.
Passion project that I've had in my mind for a very long time. So
I got to ask you, what is that going to look like for people who are joining in on that cohort?
Yeah, these are aspiring leaders that, similar to what we used to do, Sarah, as far as Aspire to Rise, is folks that want to level up in their journey. So obviously their goal is something sometimes different, right? It could be administration, and it could be a team leader, it could be a instructional coach. There's a lot of different folks that are applying, but I think everyone has got the same goal as far as using the Aspire model that was in my first book, Aspire to Lead, to have resources to start having a roadmap to get where they want to be. And I know for myself, I don't know about you, Sarah, but I got really frustrated because it was like a mystery of like how to move up in the district and who to talk to and what things you needed on your application and what to say in the interview that would get you to the point. And it took me 3 years to get there. And I was literally chomping at the bit of like, I'm ready. I need this to happen. Let's go. And I don't want other people to have that same frustration.
I love that. And that's why I loved your book so much. And I love that you said your first book, because that's fun too, when you think back. I was talking about looking back. And so listeners, you may not know, or maybe you do. I love that you have poured into aspiring leaders, that you pour into current leaders. One of my favorite experiences with you is when you have come in and spoken with my pre-service leaders who are going through the program that I teach as an adjunct professor for. And you have always been a guest that they have just delighted in and have been able to reflect in. And I actually used a quote from you this week in my coaching calls from a time when you were with my students. How funny is that?
So that is fun.
Yeah, but and I think that's what is so wonderful about just surrounding yourself with people who just legit want to help others. And that's who you are. And I'm excited for that cohort. They're so lucky to have you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Sarah. Those are very kind words. And I love getting on with your classes. They are so hungry and they're just like sponges. They just want all the information. And then I think it's like an hour that I spend with them, but they want to keep going. You know?
Oh yeah.
And you're like, no, we gotta move on. But those are some of my favorite times of the year. So yeah, anytime you want to have me back, I love speaking to that group.
You're calling me out because I didn't have any guest speakers this fall because that was just a fail on my part. And I feel so bad about that because it really is. I think, and listeners of your show know this, that while there's no one answer on how to do things, it really is helpful to find your own path when you hear from others that have walked it before, that have an iteration that they can share. And that's what I think is so beautiful about the work that you do. And I really appreciate you.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that I get to be on the show again because it's been a long time.
It has. We were looking it up. It's been over a year. You were back July of 2024. Yeah. So folks that are listening, definitely check out all the times that Sarah's been on here because I swear every episode's different, unique, and Sarah brings a ton of value and perspective from her leadership journey. And Sarah, let's dive in because I know you've been traveling a lot. I think you said you have 21 different clients that you're working with, which is a lot for one.
Yeah.
Two, I think what you present and offer administrators is just amazing. And I want to share that out with everyone that's listening today. So one of the things that you work with as far as your coaching is you talked with those who you're working with about core language values. And I think this is a great starting point for us. So what does that even mean? And what are people who are listening supposed to do in regards to reflecting on that?
Yeah. So first, I would like to couch a couple of things. One is I do have 21 clients, and those all come through the incredible organization that I work for,
Yeah.
Which is Jimmy Casas and Jay Casas and Associates. And as the evolution of time has gone on, I've been fortunate to work with this organization for probably the last 6 years. And this has been a buildup of the work that we do together as a team. So a lot of the work that I do really just comes from the framework that comes from his awesome
Jimmy's
resources that really have inspired us all. So I want to say that. And yes, our company has built. And one of the things I just want to acknowledge before we move into this, because we're kind of talking about coaching and you're building a coaching cohort, we have found as an organization, leaders, we know there's a lot of research on the benefit of coaches. And I think people in our industry and education are getting more comfortable with the idea of leadership coaching. So for a long time, we said instructional coaching, sure, teachers can benefit from that. But there's been this kind of pervasive sense that only leaders that are poor performing or whatever would need a coach. And we know that's not true in the world of coaching. We know that the best athletes have a coach. And so, best vocalists have coaches. And so I say that as the listeners, if you're a current leader and you are thinking, I'm just feeling like I need someone to help me level up, contact Joshua, because, that I can say I've worked with award-winning leaders literally across the country. And, we were just talking about this in our organization. My goal is always to help leaders just with wherever they're at and help them feel like our time was not wasted, and that through reflection, they can become the best leader that they ever thought possible. And so having said that, one of the foundational pieces that we do in our organization, and I'm so grateful for, is really help leaders clarify their leadership language. And a big piece of that is through core values development. And here's the interesting thing. And I know you have your own experiences, and I had my own getting into leadership positions, but 0 times ever through the course of my growing into leadership roles did somebody say, hey, what are your core values? And actually, more importantly, how are you going to behave when you're aligned with those? And the funny part about that is, last time we were in a session, we talked about my doctoral program, and I actually completed. So hello, Dr. Sarah Johnson.
I know you don't have that in your tagline here.
I don't. I should.
That.
I'm still getting used to it. But a big piece of that programming also had us, go through a process to develop our core values. And that was in global leadership and change as my doctoral degree. And I mention it because I think it's something that we just kind of quickly bypass and think it's not important. If we just, show people who we are in behavior every day, and we don't need to clarify it, I think that's a misstep on our part. So in the coaching process, we help them develop their leadership language because it slows us down as leaders. It creates clarity and transparency, which we know develops trust. And when you're very clear about who you are as a leader, who you're going to be in behavior as a leader, then people can start to know what to expect from you. And then they can build more and more trust. And you, during the chaotic times, have a place to anchor yourself. And having said that, it's like anything else, it's something that needs a process and attention to. I will also say I was a building principal for 6 years, and I did not share my core values with my team until I think my last year. And I was not involved in coaching. I did not have a mentor. I did not, wasn't working with Jimmy at the time. I think his book had maybe just come out anyway. So he's talking about core values and language. But at the time, it was just something that hit me because one of my teachers said to me, oh, I know you're going to get so excited about this because it's all about data. And it kind of hit me, Joshua, because I was like, okay, I think data is important. Of course, I really do. And I want to be a data informed leader. But this person, after working with me for 3 years, literally thought that the thing that was most important to me of all things was data. And it just struck me to say, okay, I need to just be really clear about what I'm about with these wonderful people that I'm working with. And I think, I have a lot of regrets that I didn't do this, that nobody helped me do this as a leader, that I didn't think it through to process that. And I think that there was a lot of headache that could have been saved through communication and clarity and relationship building if I would have done that from the beginning. And one more time, I only ever had one leader that ever shared their values with me, and it was powerful. I know you asked me about the process, but I hope that backstory is
No,
okay.
All of that was beautiful. What were your values? What did you communicate?
Yeah, I couldn't, it was 8 years ago. And that's sad for me that I can't tell you what they were at the time. I know that it was about relationships and
I figured.
communication, right? For sure. And when I think back on it, and I think, we could get really deep into this well. And part of what I really love doing with clients when they're willing to trust me is kind of cross-section it all with, kind of data about yourself in terms of who you are as a person, your personality type, through the Enneagram, through your character strengths, your signature strengths, all of this, because it shouldn't be a surprise to you when you go through the core value development to be like, oh yeah, that it kind of reminds me of what I heard on that inventory about myself, or strength finders. One of my top 5 is a connector. That would make sense then, right? So none of this should be a huge surprise. And there's a deep well of work that we can do before we get to the core values. But now they are balance, resilience, and faith. And I went through this very process that I want to talk to you about prior to writing my book, Lead with Faith, because I thought it was such a shocking thing to me that I didn't understand the difference at the time after having led schools. I didn't know the very clear difference between values, mission, and vision. Because in organizations, we go value, mission, vision, values, mission, vision, values. We always spit it out, mission, vision, values. And if we're
lump
not
it all together,
we do. And if we're not actually living and breathing through those frames for our leadership, then it just means nothing.
But I also wanted to make sure that we go through the process too, because I know what you do with your clients is phenomenal. And I know that they get a lot out of it as far as clarity, which is so huge in leadership. Because for myself, I was living, especially when I first became an administrator, I was not myself. I took on the identity of those who were around me and perform to their expectations versus being true to who I was and what was most important to me. And I know that there's a lot of folks that are listening that probably are feeling that right now, especially our new leaders as it's November and they're starting to figure out, okay, what are my roles, my responsibilities? Those are clear now, but who am I and what's my place in this building?
I'm so glad you said that because I had the same experience. I remember that as a teacher, a young teacher, and a young administrator. Because I didn't have this foundation hey, I'm going to go in the interview and I want you to know, this is clearly who I am. This is what I said those things, but it wasn't clear. This is what you can expect from me. So technically that organization could pick some things up, but they didn't know, oh yeah, Sarah Johnson's actually going to hold the line on this because that's who she is as a leader. So like you said, you start kind of meandering and you find yourself behaving in a way that you to me now in my 40s, I want to kind of smack her upside the head, right? Why did you do that? You would never do that now. Yes. So good. This is great. People who are aspiring, if you've kind of lost your way, we say that too in JCAS and Associates. So, people don't commit to being average. They lose their way, right? But core values anchor us and they give us that leadership language. And they also empower us to make the tough decisions, have the hard conversations, stand on firm ground when we know that we should do something versus what might be easier, those kinds of things. So, but yeah, so the process is this, and it's not a secret. I personally use Brené Brown's process that she published in Dare to Lead. And so I know you're a guy who always wants your listeners to have a resource. We can talk about the importance of core values all day long, but the way that she has it really does a great job of helping you distill it. In Lead with Faith, I actually wrote about 2 other processes that you can do. And really at the end of the day, it comes down to making sure that you're spending time in reflection. What do these words actually mean? And as a former English teacher, I'm a geek about connotative and denotative meanings of words because you're going to say kindness and it will mean something very different in action to you than it does to me. Yesterday, I was working with some clients and it was a group coaching situation and we were talking about our values and we were going through this process. When one of them said perseverance was a core value, in my head, I was thinking, well, so what does that look like in behavior? And his response actually was completely off from what I would think. So that's why it's important to go through this. And also, I would say, too, that for aspiring leaders and current leaders, Going through this process for yourself to develop your own leadership language will help you work that muscle when it's time to help your organization develop core values. Because imagine if you're struggling to define what the word courage means in action, imagine what it's like to get a table of leaders together trying to define it for a whole organization.
Very true.
Yeah. We could link this if you want, but the process does come from Dare to Lead. With my clients at our organization, sometimes my colleagues will use card sorting activities to kind of distill this down for figuring out which words you're going to focus on. But here's what I can tell you. Brené Brown in her research through organizational development says that they want you to get to 2. And we're not going to be able to uncover a lot of this, but going through the process of getting, all of the words possible that you can, she has a PDF link that you can look at, and then narrowing it down to 15 first. And then the researcher in us, we're like, then you start coming up with themes and coding those themes, and you come up with categories. And I have my clients then put them into 2 to 3 categories of those 15. And then from there, you choose either the one word that kind of encapsulates all of those related words, or you rename that category. And bam, you've got your 2 to 3 core values. I would recommend too that you just keep going back to this and sitting with it. I know that Brené Brown says, and I had the same experience, Joshua, that I had a lot of shame triggers because I would think about what people wanted me to say.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those was family. I felt like if I didn't put family as a core value, then that feels wrong. What I found though, family shows up in all of my core values in balance, resilience, and faith. Sure. For me, family falls under every single one of those. So that's why we do the categorizing.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, the idea is having that core value decided, but then you need to distill it into behaviors because guess what? Culture is behavior. Core values are behavior. You cannot just profess I'm about relationships and then be the person who does not intentionally engage with people and follow up and make intentional connections. A lot of people say as leaders, I'm about relationships. Okay, but what does that look like in behavior? So you define the 3 behaviors that align with that value. And then, because this is important, none of us operate perfectly from our core values every day. It turns out that we're human and our excrement does stink.
I love the actions speak louder than words.
There you go.
Also, because the other component of that is that if you say it, people are also watching.
Yes. So that's the beautiful part, right? But you have to get this process down first. You're sturdy in it. The second piece you do is you list the slippery slope behaviors. What am I doing when I'm not living in this value? And, fine, if it's about relationships and you've got this intentional thing, a slippery slope behavior might be when you recognize there's a pattern for you as a person that you're not living in that core value when you dismiss people. As a leader, for example, you're on your computer while they're talking to you.
Yep.
You pop on your phone while they're talking to you. These are slippery slope behaviors that show you're not valuing that person in the moment and that relationship connection, right? So these are the things that she says you do. And then the next step is great. You got them. You have these behaviors listed, communicate it to your team, and then have them hold you invested. Think ahead how you're going to react when someone says, that's not what I would expect from you based on what you've said you're going to be about. Be prepared for that because we're going to have an emotional response, but build the culture that allows for that feedback. But you can't do that unless you clarify it.
So, Sarah, let's say our listeners have gone through this activity, right? And they've chunked it and they've got their 15, they're breaking it down, they get it to like 2 or 3 core values. What do they do with it then? Is it something like I need to make it visible somewhere so it reminds me? Like, what is the next step?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways that you can do it, and it depends on your context. But I think first, personally for me, I think you need to ground yourself in them and make sure that they are what you are truly about. Practice with them, keep yourself engaged with it. You can have any process. I have a lot of clients that will make a beautiful swaggy picture of them and print it and have it by their desks, right?
Sure.
Others, you just, write it down every day in a journal, embed it. This would go even deeper, but this is not for this podcast. Embed it into your mission. Have a core mission. Who are you going to show up as every day? Yeah. And make sure that the way you word that is so meaningful that it harkens back to those core values. That to me is huge. Yeah, all of this, by the way, hey, that's another resource. It is in Lead with Faith. I forget about that. And again, that was before I started coaching clients, and it was a part of someone else's framework to do this. So I wanted to say too, I mentioned this to Joshua, like it's so easy to just blow by this, but I've already mentioned to you, Brene Brown talks about, like, works through this with organizations. We did this in a doctoral level programming. I did write about it in Lead with Faith. Jimmy's got it in Culturize. And so, this is really important foundational work.
For sure.
To do.
Well, and it's being repeated by amazing people. Like,
right.
It's obviously something that's important and something that needs to be embedded, but it's also not common knowledge or common practice for a lot of leaders.
No. And then I think too, like, it's one thing, like you said too, to just not forget them when you get into an organization, because then there's a whole other leap that people always ask. Is this me as a leader or a principal or a person? And I say they should be the same. But I understand why it's hard, because then you're like, well, I want to be, students first kind of a thing. Yes. Clarify that a little bit another way. But we also have then, okay, so how do you align your personal leadership core values with the organizations? Because that's the second step. And that's, again, another reflective process, seeing how they line up. And again, defining, all right, so if my core value is courage, what does that look like carried forward with the organizational core value of X, Y, and Z? Okay. And you do like a crosswalk for yourself, if that makes sense.
Totally. All right. I know we can go super deep in this. You said it's a well of information that you coach through for, pretty long time with clients, but you had talked about your doctoral program. We discussed that in length last time, a year ago. Now you're Dr. Sarah Johnson. So will you share out what your final piece was as far as, your research and what you had to stand behind to get that doctor in front of your name?
Dang, that could have been this podcast, huh? So my dissertation and the way that I contributed research to the field was I studied the intersection of burnout, spiritual self-care, and principles, perception on how that impacts their resilience through burnout. And what I got to defend with my research and stand on and be welcomed into that, space of being a doctor, is that my findings, while it's not transferable because I did a deeper study, a deeper analysis on a few leaders, so it's not like a quantitative study, but I found that leaders, principals specifically, all faced some real common challenges. Interestingly, one of them was not student behavior. But they were resources, challenges from political challenges from outside district entities.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is, friends, the adults, one of the 100%. Biggest stressors. Yeah. Yeah. Budget. And then, of course, just the task load on principals. Those were the 5 challenges that were contributing to burnout. Here's the hope that I found is through studying resilience. Technically, my whole research was on, burnout, but resilience and the evolution of self-care. Burnout was a systemic issue. And I almost stopped doing my research, Joshua, because I was like, I can't fix that. I can't. But what I found was hope in this idea that we are resilient. We are able to be resilient. That goes back to, I think people get tired of hearing like focus on your why, but you cannot be resilient if you don't. Mm-hmm. But then spiritual self-care, which is where I studied, where I put the crux in, is that it does have a significant impact on principals' perception of their ability to be resilient. And it was things like being very intentional about finding space for themselves. My study participants found space to be in nature. They found space to be disconnected from the title for a while. That was a huge factor. Making space to, whether it was a religious practice or a spiritual practice of, meditation or prayer, had a huge impact on these leaders' perceptions and their abilities to be resilient. So this is an area that I filled the gap because nobody talks about spiritual self-care. They want to talk about physical well-being and all these other things, but it's a thing we want to stay away from in the education industry. But I was grateful to find that, in fact, there's a lot there. It's a huge passion area for me. And I know too that the cool part is I found some really, really phenomenal foundational studies on this idea of spirituality and spiritual self-care and resilience. And it transfers to all sorts of other disciplines like neuropeptides in the brain. So it has a neuroscience connection. You can call quanta in physics is energy. And this idea that we really do have an energetic core to us. So whether you take religion or spirituality, either practice develops the energy inside of yourself and helps you launch up from the bottom when you're in a pit from that resilience piece. So thanks. I geeked out. I get excited. I get so excited about it. That's what I was up to for years, studying and writing my own study.
Maybe you'll have another resource that's connected with that passion of yours. I think that's something that's definitely needed in the world of education, as so many folks are feeling exactly what you're talking about. And I was like, speak the truth, Sarah, because all of those things I felt, in my leadership journey as stressors or things that were taking the joy away from the position. Let's talk about an actual item. You've done this many times with me on this show, but I always like leaving the listeners with something. So if there's something they can do today, tomorrow, next week to enhance their leadership journey, and if you want to connect it with something that we talked about, feel free to do so. Or if maybe there's something on the top of your mind that maybe is better for the time of year, what would you recommend them do?
Yeah, I would just say go back to do exactly what we talked about today is, well, first of all, sign up for Joshua's cohort. That's number one. Number two, go through the process of the core values development. If you haven't, and if you have developed them before, maybe used a different process, or maybe it's been a while, do it again. Do a little test. Is that still where you want to focus your energies in your life? Yeah, of course, I said Dare to Lead has that resource in there. I actually do have it in Lead with Faith is laid out. The whole process is. So a couple of ways to go about that. But I highly recommend going through the process. And I will be fully transparent. I wrote mine back in 2018 and I'm going through them again because here's the funny part really quickly too. I want to say this is the power in living values aligned. I set those values prior to the works that I produced. And because I was so focused on who I was going to be through those core values, I ended up publishing a book called Balance Like a Pirate, Going Beyond Work-Life Balance. I published a work called Lead with Faith, Rise Up, Slay Fear, and Serve Well. Faith and balance are in those. And then my dissertation, it's not a surprise, though I didn't start out studying resilience. My dissertation is about resilience. So it's like that way that our brains can kind of train ourselves into these behaviors. I think that's a powerful example of how this can really have an impact on you as a leader and what you contribute to the world.
Yeah, and folks need to understand that we change as we get older. So with our different experiences and whatnot. So, I mean, what you have 10 years ago, 5 years ago, could be very different than what you are today as a leader.
Yeah. And I'm ready for me personally. A couple of those are going to stay, but I'm ready to spend some time focusing my energies in other spaces. So I'm going to go ahead and readjust my core values, my mission, and my vision. It's time.
Love it. All right. So Sarah, if people want to connect with you via website or social media, how can they do that?
Can catch me on sarahsajohnson.com. Best way if you want to have a one-on-one, and I'm always happy to interact after you hear a podcast and you think, I want to learn more. Feel free to reach out to me through that website. You can find me on primarily Instagram if you want to do that on socials. And again, it's all at Sarah S.A. Johnson.
So are you not on social media a lot? You're
not a lot. No, don't love it. Gonna be honest.
You hesitated.
Yeah. Yep. That's part of the stress reduction for myself and balance is keeping myself off of those platforms for a while.
Well, your actions are going with your words. So I like it. All right. Yeah. If you want to connect with Sarah, I'll make sure all of us are in the show notes for you. Sarah, like I said, is a beautiful coach, amazing leader. She's got a ton of resources. So make sure that you're connecting with her. If you have any questions from this episode or a previous episode, hopefully you're tuning in to the previous episodes that Sarah was on here. But with that, my friend, I'm so grateful for you as a person, you as a leadership coach, a speaker, an author, podcaster. Man, you're like a Letterman of education, but you are just pouring into people. And I love that about you. I appreciate your time today. And again, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead.
Thank you, Joshua. It's been a pleasure as always.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.